Welcome to Him's House. I'm excited to share with you this conversation about Him's Q4 earnings. But first, let me tell you about Mochi Health. In 2026, you can get literally anything delivered to your door in an hour. But if you want to see a specialist, you're booking 3 weeks out and waiting for hours in a waiting room, only to stand in another line at the pharmacy. Mochi Health fixes that. They've built a nationwide telehealth platform that operates across all 50 states, matching you with board-certified physicians who actually specialize in metabolic health. You get a real consultation and a personalized treatment plan that gets delivered straight to your door. We're talking about a platform that has already helped 400,000 members lose over 5 million pounds. And it's not just weight loss anymore. Mochi is now a full-scale healthcare marketplace that covers over 120 conditions from dermatology and hair loss to sleep apnea and mental health. For a limited time, you can get more than 50% off your first month of membership. Go to joinmochi.com. That's joinmochi.com. Take the 2-minute assessment, choose your doctor, and join the growing community now. Mochi, your health can't wait. And now here is my conversation with Mark Mulhern. Him's House, episode 58. My name is Jonathan Stern. Today I'm here with Mark Mulhern. He writes under the pseudonym Manu Invests, is a longtime Hims shareholder, and has written analyses on Uber that received acclaim from people like Bill Ackman and Josh Brown. Before writing for Manu Invests, he spent nearly a decade working in the financial industry. Today, he serves as the executive director of a nonprofit. Mark, welcome to Hims House.
Thanks, Jonathan. Super excited to be here. I've been a long-time follower, as I've been a long-time shareholder. And it's pretty cool to make it on the podcast.
Well, thank you for joining. The topic of today is Q4. We just had earnings last Monday. By the time this comes out, it will be, I think, a week after earnings, week to the day. So I want to run through the numbers quickly and then sort of get your sense on what we saw, how you're feeling about the investment, anything else that comes to mind. Just as a quick reaction to the numbers. So we had $2.35 billion in revenue for the full year. That's 2025. 618 million, I think, for the quarter. That's 59% growth year over year. EBITDA of 318 million for the year. Net new subscriber growth of, I think, 13% year over year. Slowed to a crawl in Q3 and Q4, up 2% in Q4, up 1% in Q3. That's quarter over quarter. But notably, long-term 2030 targets, that's 6.5 billion in revenue and 1.3 billion in adjusted EBITDA, were reaffirmed. This is not official guidance. Right? Like, this is just their. It is a target, right? It's not. This is not a. I think they've said this is not official guidance. Okay, so there are some numbers. What did you think about all that, Mark?
So, overall, I thought it was, all things considered, like an okay report, right? It was meh. It was nothing super exciting to me. But taking into account like all the recent news, I was pretty content with it. They hit their midpoint on their full year guide. It's good revenue growth. Obviously, there's some concerns about like subscriber growth. And more importantly, it wasn't like the greatest guide for next year as a baseline. On the low end, it's like 15% growth. That is coming with some tough comps because, GLP-1 peaks were this year. But what I was really looking for was, in the short term, affirmation of 2030 guide. And I was looking for a little insight into some of the recent news that I didn't really walk away with after the call. But, so-so earnings to me.
You were expecting them to get into something related to the lawsuit, something related to the FDA, DOJ investigation. Apparently, there's an SEC investigation now that no one knew about until we read the risk section of the 10K. None of this really came up on the call.
Yeah, I was, I was excited for the call, mainly for that. I thought, we'll get into it obviously, but I wasn't that excited. I wasn't excited at all when I saw the pill announcement. My reaction was more of like, why? I thought it was too risky. I thought it was too bold. I was excited that Hims had been on a trajectory to kind of diversify. They had launched several new products. They had recent acquisitions. They were starting to go international. I thought it was unnecessary. But more importantly, I thought the communication and reaction wasn't there from management at all, which was frustrating to me as a shareholder.
Yeah. On the guidance, you said you were a little disappointed that it's like mid-teens on the low end. I think it's important. So let's get the numbers out there. It's 2.7 to 2.8 billion dollars for 2026. Midpoint would be 2.75 billion. They said this excludes Eucalyptus, right? And Eucalyptus is scheduled to close supposedly middle of the year. I think they said probably second half, which means that the second half revenue, Eucalyptus revenue from the second half of 2026 would be included, but probably not first half revenue, right? So you can maybe tack on an additional, if we take, what was Eucalyptus's revenue in 2025? It was above 400 million.
Yeah,
right?
I think their run rate is like 450.
450, right? And so if, assuming that they have 0% growth, which is probably not a fair assumption, right?
Yep.
Like extremely conservative, and you chop that in half, that gives you 225. You tack that onto the 2.75 billion, and you're pushing up on 3 billion for the year. So is that sort of where you're expecting the dust to settle at the end of 26?
Yeah.
In the $3+ billion range?
Yeah, that I am. And Hims does historically usually beat guidance, right? So I'm hoping too there's a little bit of conservatism like baked into the guide itself organically. So there is the optionality that we may get a good beat at the end of the year. But I definitely, I would prefer to see like obviously I'll take the growth with Eucalyptus. I'm excited about international expansion. But I do prefer to see like organic core growth, stay in the 20s rather than be dipping into the mid-teens.
Yeah. I found it interesting that 2025 was really the first year in company history that they did not blow away the guidance that they set for themselves at the beginning of the year. Isn't that correct? That they like for the last 4 or 5 years they've been blowing away guidance. At the end of the year.
They landed like from Q1's guide. So I don't know if they updated Q1 from Q4 prior year, but off Q1 they dead smacked midpoint. I think it was 2.3 to 2.4, and they came in at 2.35.
Right.
So obviously I love beats, and Hims has a history of big beats. That might be changing a bit. But I try to stay grounded as well. And I try, as long as they hit, they gave a guide, they hit it, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, my hope, and it's really just a hope at this point, is that they learned that it can be pretty painful for the stock price when you're not raising guidance throughout the year.
Yes.
And as a result, again, it's just a hope, but it's also like this is probably what they should be doing. 2026 guidance is on the conservative side, so that they have a little wiggle room, a little buffer, and that they can comfortably raise throughout the year as they've done in years past. And I really hope that they get back to that this year. We'll see. It's a hope.
Because that was one of the big down pulls on the stock price this year, I think, is if you remember in like Q1 and Q2, the numbers were coming out and everyone was basically extrapolating that like they're not going to hit their guide, or this means there needs to be like massive acceleration in Q3 and Q4. Like, they set themselves up, maybe leaning into commercial GLP-1 a little too hard. Maybe it ended a little sooner than expected, but to your point, hopefully lesson learned, and they left room in this guide to tick it up a bit as they go.
Yeah, getting back to that earnings call. So, as we've said, there were, I think, 3 elephants in the room that were sort of there the whole time and never mentioned, and it was sort of weird to me. Maybe the analysts were instructed not to ask about these things. Maybe the analysts were not allowed to ask questions if they were going to ask. I have no idea what's going on behind closed doors. But there are three elephants, right? The Novo Nordisk lawsuit, the FDA investigation, and the DOJ investigation. What was going on there? Why didn't those come up until the final question when Ryan McDonald from Needham did sort of ask about it, but there was essentially no answer?
Yeah, so I was I don't want to say I hated the call, but I went into the call
Yeah.
more specifically looking for insight into all of this rather than the actual earnings at this point, you know? Like I wanted, you know, I was even frustrated like in the hims and hers communication response of like us versus big pharma and stuff, like almost leaning too hard into the mission style of things. Like at the end of the day, you know, you have investors that are shareholders in your company, and we deserve to know what's going on a bit. And I can't believe it wasn't like the first questions that were asked, which leads me to believe, to your point, that there was cherry picking or guidance going on.
Yeah.
And it was the last question. And, you know, we had to find out about a lot of other stuff through disclosures that wasn't spoken about on the call. And even Andrew's response was kind of just like, you know, we can't really talk about this. We can't really talk about that. And not really giving much insight.
Yeah, I think, like, to Andrew's point, there's probably a lot that they can't talk about, that the lawyers have told them,
Yeah.
you really shouldn't be commenting on this in public, right? But I'm not sure that the way it was handled was preferable either. What would transparency have looked like to you? Like, how do you think they should have done things differently?
So, in my opinion, you know, I think obviously, like the pill, you know, Andrew is a very mission focused person, right? He is very vocal about their mission to make healthcare affordable and accessible to everybody. You know, patents and the integrity of research needs to exist, though, for medical advancements to move forward. So, in my opinion, right,
Yes.
whether you violated a patent or not, you push the limits of the spirit of the law, right? If you can launch a somewhat knockoff version of a breakthrough drug weeks after it came out and cut the price, you're crossing that line, right? So, you know, I don't know what they were thinking when they did it initially, but I would have liked the call, whether they could have gotten into the specifics or not, to really start out by addressing that. Like, you know, the prepared statements should have been more along the lines of like, hi, everyone. You know, we understand the recent headlines and uncertainty that has arisen due to our decision to launch this pill.
Yep.
This is why we strategically didn't. You know, we now, after conversing with the FDA, etc., we now recognize that this is not the time and that further conversations need to happen. But rest assured, you know, we are confident in our position, blah, 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 because of so-and-so, right? And stating right out, like, we while we can't get into specifics, we are aware. We are very conscious of investor perception, and we will continue to communicate as we can, you know? So you can even say, so we're going to avoid questions that go into that for the time being.
Yeah, I have to say, if they weren't planning to answer the questions about the things that the investors really, really, really cared about, I would have loved to have heard about why. I would have loved to have heard that up front, and then why, and then you move on. But it's like we were waiting for 45 minutes. No questions or answers about the stuff we most care about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, double-clicking into this GLP-1 saga. Let's just walk through the timeline, because it's kind of wild. I'm sure most of the listeners remember exactly what happened, but for those who may not, we're going to walk through the timeline. Hims launched a $49 copycat Wegovy pill on February 5th, compounded semaglutide. February 5th, that's a Thursday. Within minutes, I think the Novo CEO was asked about it on their earnings call that morning and said, it's not going to work because there's no snack. Later that day, Novo threatened to sue. Hims was then under investigation by the FDA and the DOJ by Friday afternoon. That sort of dropped after hours, I think maybe 30 minutes after close. Hims pulled the pill on Saturday took it off the website in the comms tweet. I think that was the comms tweet that you referenced, Mark. And then on Monday, Novo dropped the bomb that we were sort of all waiting for in 2025 and finally sued Hims, not for false advertising, right, but for patent infringement. It took the launch of the compounded semaglutide pill in 2026 to sort of push Novo over the line. First question is like, what do you think Hims was thinking? Why did they do this? What from their, like, I've sort of tried to go through the calculations and the reasonings and come up with a defense for this sort of action that would have led to absolute chaos. Was it a miscalculation? Was it something else? Is there any defense of what happened?
For me, no. I mean, there's a couple flags in the earnings. If Ro's taking more market share, right? So the competitive landscape in the United States in particular has definitely changed over the last year.
Yeah.
We have Trump RX, we have more competitors. You have Novo cutting their prices. And even if you look at like the US growth once they broke it out, it wasn't what I was hoping it would be, right? So on one hand, it seems a little desperate, right, to stay relevant or to stay competitive, because I believe Ro has the pill through partnership, right?
They do have the pill. Yeah. I think they're partnered with both Novo and Eli Lilly now.
Yeah, so maybe trying to stay relevant a little. Also, though, like I said, Andrew's a little super mission focused and vocal about that. So on one hand, it's like, maybe they're full blown leaning into that mission and vision of what healthcare is. But at the end of the day, you're a business that needs to be profitable and has shareholders and owners to report to. And I don't think it was the best business decision to make at the time. I was super frustrated. At the time I saw the announcement, I was like, we could have walked into earnings with multiple new products, international expansion, a Super Bowl commercial coming up, and instead you launch this risky pill like a couple weeks before, and chaos ensues, And
that's a good point. It's like they hit guidance.
They had the runway.
2025. We don't yet know where revenue is for first quarter 2026, but we still have a full month, right? And peptides are on the horizon, and even if they miss or like have a rough quarter, they could probably make it up second half of the year if they do a few things differently. Yeah, you're exactly right that like things aren't where we thought they'd be probably in the third quarter of 2025. But compared to, I don't know, even early January, right? Where share price was pushing up against the 40s.
Yeah.
And we didn't have 3 investigations, that is FDA, DOJ, SEC, and a lawsuit, not to mention other class action lawsuits. It was a much more peaceful landscape for him shareholders just 4 weeks ago.
And that's what baffles me a little bit. Like I said, if Hims was in the 60s and they guided this growth, there would have been multiple compression, right? But they weren't in the 60s. They were in the 40s, getting close to the 40s. And
I think 20. Yeah, I think 20s by the time they launched it was like mid to low 20s by the time they launched the pill. It shot up to 29, and then it was a stair step down the rest of the day, particularly once Novo threatened the lawsuit. And they closed in the red, down 4% or something like that. But
the thing is that like they really pivoted this call to highlighting international, which they were. That's what frustrates me, is that they were like set up to tell that story. We've launched several new lines of products. We got labs going, testosterone succeeding, showing good signs. We have Zava, and we're about to announce a new acquisition, or we're exploring a future international acquisition. Here we're breaking out how international is our new growth lever, all of that, right? But the pill just like threw a wrench in whatever runway the investors had to follow, in my opinion.
So you are you? It sounds like you're pretty excited about international, Mark. Could you walk us through I guess why you're an Uber expert, and of course they've had this whole international story as well. I don't know if there are analogies there that
Yep.
you think are worth exploring or going into, but let's move to international and your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, so I'll be honest. The first time, like a year ago, that Hims brought up international,
Yeah.
it was a very different dynamic back then, obviously. I was a little like, oh, don't lose sight of the prize. There's a lot of saturation left in America. We're rapidly growing. Let's stay focused. Obviously, the dynamic has changed a bit. Competition has heated up. Commercial GLPs went away. So the US market is highly competitive right now. The things I mentioned, we got Trump, we got, politics getting involved. We have price cuts from the big pharma companies. We have new GLP-1 products, Rose growing. So now I was excited about Zava. Now I think it's the right move. So like one of my big things about Uber is, all of the AV conversation is solely focused on America right now. And rightfully so, like it's the biggest market there is. But Uber is the only global competitor. Uber is like the only one that's operating on a global scale. And I think there's something to be said for that. International markets typically have a lot more room for growth. They lag behind the United States. We're obviously saw this quarter, like the US growth slowed down. It was mainly pulled by international. I think US grew like 17%. So, in my opinion, what I want, to me, I was in Hims before GLP-1. What I really wanted over the last year.
When did you first buy, Mark?
So I first bought at like $12.
Okay.
My heavy buying was between 12 and 15. So the beginning of 2024, right when they kind of had their first profitable quarter. But my hope over the last year, I've always viewed GLP-1 as this like, many investors came after commercial GLP-1. They came after the excitement. To me, it was always a short-term cash cow, customer acquisition tool, rapid growth stage that I knew was coming to an end. And so, now that is over, what I really wanted this year was to like execute out of being the GLP-1 company, right? To diversify their product offerings and
you were looking
do
for
them in more places.
You were looking for 2025 to be that year, or you're saying?
No, so like second half of 2025 into 2026. So they were doing that, right? They launched labs, they launched hormone support, they started to do international. So that's why the pill also kind of frustrated me. I felt like we were like sticking our foot back in the GLP-1 pool when we were diversifying geographically and product-wise. But yeah, I mean, we obviously need new growth levers. I'm excited to see them get international. Some people are saying they're acquiring revenue, right? But I actually think that some of the acquisitions are the best moves to get international. They're already established in countries. They already are integrated into regulations and stuff like that. So kind of a fast track for Hims to diversify their market.
Tell me about how you're thinking about the core business. You mentioned the slowdown. It is like a very serious concern at this point. Part of the reason, as you just said, that they're doing international, probably part of the reason that they decided to reach for that compounded semaglutide pill. You've said you are still an investor. I'm a little worried about the core business, given that the telehealth market in the United States continues to be so fragmented and so competitive. Pricing pressure continues to be pretty strong, right? Strong to the downside. Like, why are you still excited about Hims? What do you think there's a way to reaccelerate the core business, or are they just going to have to keep tacking new verticals on, like testosterone and menopause? I suppose peptides are coming. We can talk about that in a minute. And probably there are all sorts of other verticals that we haven't talked about too. Andrew talks about sleep and recovery and optimization. Maybe that's peptides, but go take.
All right.
Take some of that.
All right. So first, I want to say I typically don't invest in like pharma,
Mm.
healthcare, or health insurance type companies,
What is
right?
what is your wheelhouse?
So, I mean, I'm more into like, tech or traditional businesses,
Yeah.
pharma, there's so much optionality about like testing and all that. I mean, look at Novo right now. Like they're the one with all the breakthrough drugs and they're getting crushed, right? There's too much regulation. So I actually didn't invest. This was kind of the frustrating thing to me about the pill as well, right? I invested in Hims because it was a solution to a consumer pain point. I have
Mm.
felt the pain of the U.S. healthcare system. I have had my doctor's appointments booked 3 months in advance and rescheduled or canceled the day before to
Yep.
get an appointment 3 months later. I have had uncomfortable conversations with my provider who made me feel weird asking certain things,
Really.
right? Like it stuck out to me for its frictionless access to initially awkward medications, right? I know several people that use Hims and love it. It caught my attention too because the marketing is what caught my attention, right? Quite frankly, I was like, that commercial makes having ED look cool. You know what I mean? Like, so that's why I started looking at the
Yeah, they had,
company.
you know, cactuses in Times Square
Yeah,
on the subway.
you know,
An unforgettable advertising campaign
yeah,
from 5, 6 years ago
yeah,
that is just an all-time D2C masterclass.
yes,
One of the greatest campaigns of all time. Yeah.
100%. So, with the pill, I was like, you're trying to play pharma here, and we're not that, right? So I was frustrated like that, but um, I
Interesting.
also will say, like, I get the core designation and stuff. I also am not the biggest fan of like the core arguments, right? Like, I don't care so much if like their initial product launches are slowing. What I care about is Hims as a platform and as a solution coming up with more ways to solve problems for the people they serve, right? So I don't get like that held up in like, oh, these are their four core products, everything else is an add-on. Like companies grow. Netflix was a DVD company, right? So at what point did streaming become the core and not DVDs? Now they make movies, now they make their own shows. Like at what point did producing go from a new business to part of their core strategy? So I don't get like too caught up in that. What I am concerned about is, US growth slowing. But what I want to see from the company and what we are seeing is a pivot off of that, right? So obviously I don't love them to be their market share is still growing, but very, very flat compared to what it was. But I'm also happy to accept that, like, as long as they're laying out the verticals for continued growth, like labs, all that stuff was this quarter, right? Like, I think there's long runways for that stuff. I think they create flywheels for people participating. But I'm happy to see the company acknowledge that and pivot towards international growth at this point.
And so the two new level, if we were to use the DVD and
Mhm.
streaming analogy, the two things that get you excited, sort of like streaming with Netflix, would be international and labs. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Or and labs as an entry point for the rest of the platform?
So I think one of the big things, so like, Row, for instance, right now, the pill is probably they're probably not making much off the pill at all. What it is an entry point into their ecosystem, right? So we do see that the more people that get onto the Hims platform, the more people, more and more of that percentage are becoming personalized users, right? Or becoming multi-prescription users.
They certainly say that. Yeah.
They say.
I mean,
So,
I'll be honest. Like they have these hair products, right? That's the so-called personalized hybrid
yeah.
that I think they're selling in pretty much in mass.
But the point I'm making is that like um I'm curious to get my labs done, right? Like I had labs through my doctor and they were like, "Oh, I was like, "Can we test this and this?" And they're like, "I mean, there's really no reason to." They made me feel awkward for asking, right? Like and some people were like, oh, half of these things didn't even come back with any recommendations. Like, that's a good thing, right? If you have labs that come back good. But Hims is saying like something like 70% of people get flagged for some treatable condition from a Hims product. So the more people that, the more entryways we have into the Hims system, the happier I am. I don't think labs in and of itself is like a major breakthrough product right now. Maybe it can turn into one, becomes cheaper, becomes more accessible. But what it is really a flywheel to get people into the Hims ecosystem, turns into their data flywheel, flywheels with their personalized care, and becomes a new avenue for like customer acquisition.
What strengthened your sense of the thesis in 2025? We of course had the hiring of Dirja Power, the new and first ever chief product officer, Mo El Shinawi as chief technology officer. We've had probably half a dozen, maybe more, ex-Cruise machine learning and AI engineering talent follow him to Hims. So there's this new AI team that's building, we still don't know what. In addition to that, labs, as you've said, what got you most excited in 2025, and why are you still a shareholder?
So Dirja was one of my favorite hires for sure. So 2025, what got me most excited was what I was looking forward most to was really hormones launching. So again, though, the launch kind of was deflating to me. I didn't think it was the greatest product launch. It seemed like it launched before they were ready to fully scale it. But I think there's a long runway in labs and like tests and menopause stuff.
And by hormonals, do you mean specifically the women's side or the men's side, or were both frustrating to you?
So the men's side was a little. So I just felt like, I felt like the gummies got more of a rollout than it did. Right, so we got these, not that like a cool YouTube video was anything special, but like
there was an event in New York City where there were like gummies everywhere in Midtown Manhattan. There was this big gummies event, right? It made it into the New York Post and various other publications, I think. Maybe we had articles I guess we did have some articles in major media outlets for menopause and testosterone. Yeah,
but
I don't think we had events in Midtown.
No. And so I was a little let down by that. So on one hand, I feel like Hims got a little ahead of itself, like trying to almost feed into the news. They became like a headline stock. Hims is like the most newsworthy stock there is right now for the last year, negative and positive. But I felt like they were constantly trying to like hit a new headline, right? Like I felt like specifically like testosterone and stuff just came out before it was fully ready to scale. Like I felt like we all thought we were going to be able to get at-home lab testing, and then you had to go to Quest, which is like fine, but it just felt discombobulated to me. But I'm most excited about, they launched several new verticals at the end of the year, right? They have invested money, increasing their square footage, right? They're more verticalizing their product lines,
That's right? 1 million square feet. You gotta do something with all that.
And then leaning into international, right? So, the investment obviously costs money, but Hims has a history of like running things slightly negative or at break even, and monetizing them with economies of scale, right? So they're putting in the groundwork this year to do that. What kept me as an investor was after GLP-1's final commercial quarter, there was a Q-over-Q drop in revenue and stuff like that as expected, but we surpassed peak GLP-1 commercial revenue like back in one quarter, so you took out the whole argument about like commercial GLP-1 is what is driving this company. Within 2 quarters they were able to reaccelerate and pass those heights. So that was showing to me that like the underlying product engine and growth engine is still there. And they were able to use kind of these peak growth numbers to get some cash up, to get some new consumers and really like fuel things up. So I know many people who invested in that craze aren't happy to hear that, but that's how I viewed it the whole time.
Great. Let's turn to peptides. I don't know what you think about peptides, Mark. You're in Boston, right?
Yep.
First question is, do you know anyone on peptides?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. Not that I know of.
I'm in New York City. What I'll say is that I don't have any friends who are on peptides, but I have met people here who are. But they're sort of outside my outside my closest circle of. And so I'm just trying to understand how large this opportunity is, right? Because online, it's absolutely insane, and I think Twitter can sometimes be taken over by at least my timeline, by the two coastal hubs of San Francisco, at least for tech, because I'm on tech Twitter, and New York, right?
Yep.
And so I am seeing multiple people claim that 2026 is the year of peptides. Peptides are going to be the biggest consumer category of the year, this and that. We just had RFK going on Rogan saying, sort of confirming the rumors that we've been hearing for a couple months now, that the FDA is looking to act on peptides and will remove 14 from the category 2 list, essentially opening them up for compounding pharmacies to legally sell them. Hims has the peptide manufacturing facility. To my knowledge, it's the only telehealth in the United States that owns its own peptide facility. So Andrew was early there. Like, you got to give them that, right? They have CS Bio in, I think it's Menlo Park. It's right outside. It's somewhere in Silicon Valley. I just don't know what to make of this whole peptide. Like, I don't know if anyone in Iowa who's on peptides. Even in Boston, I think it's probably less of a trend. It's certainly massive in San Francisco, where they're having peptide raves. There are some people in New York who are doing it, and probably Austin, Texas, and some other cities with like some culturally some cultural innovators, we'll call them. But how are you thinking about this whole opportunity, peptides?
So, like I said, I've never personally been exposed. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts with guests that discuss it. I also see a lot about it. Huberman talks about it all the time. So, Andrew talks about it all the time. So, I think there's a big market, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But, I don't have like a high confidence in that. But what I will say is that, Hims is positioned for it, right? Hims. So the interview the other day with RFK, made me perk up.
The Rogan appearance.
Yeah. Yep. So, Hims is the one that is positioned for it, right? This has been part of their pipeline idea for quite some time now. And as you said, like, they're the best positioned telehealth company in the US. So I already have people messaging me like, is this GLP-1 all over again? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm happy to have a new market that Hims is positioned to enter as a first mover, become open to the company and the United States.
And when you say, is this GLP-1s, again, you mean like, is this the next explosive level of growth?
Yep.
That, like, the market is almost certainly not priced in yet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So many people are excited about it. It floods my Twitter or X, but I'm not that exposed to it myself. So only time will tell.
Okay. Let's see. We're at 40 minutes in. What else do we want to talk about here? Hims has hired dozens of AI ML engineers. What are they building?
That's a question that I want to know the answer to. When I was talking a little bit earlier about communication, this is what I'm looking for, right? I don't think management has done a good job of laying out the plan and the reasoning behind some things, right? I often joke about like, Dudum's insight in this earnings call is going to be like the breakthrough accelerating longevity flywheel of the Hims breakthrough technology that expands life cycles. It seems like it's a bunch of flashy words to me sometimes without much content actually behind them. And they've alluded to like wearables. They certainly allude to the flywheel of like data, right? Like how can we use AI to better understand the customer, better prescribe, better personalize. Like I believe in all that, right? But they're hiring and emphasizing AI a lot, and they haven't highlighted at all like what its end game is, or what's coming out of it, you know? So that falls into the communication bucket for me.
I'll just add, they have this system called MedMatch, which they played up and had multiple press releases on and talked about during various earnings calls. But we are now in the hottest AI cycle of all time, and have not heard a word about MedMatch.
Yeah.
We hear about AI, we hear about ML. We continue to hire applied AI engineers, but MedMatch has sort of fallen to the side. So I don't know if we're like rebuilding that or moving on from calling it MedMatch or what. But
yeah, we haven't even heard that word in like a year.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Like it was talked about very often when I became a initial shareholder, and then I genuinely don't think I've heard that term in a year until this very moment that you just stated it. You know?
Yeah, it popped into my head, but I think about Hims too much. But we'd have to search the earnings transcripts to see when the last time it's been mentioned on the call. But I don't think it's been mentioned for a little while. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the things Hims is embroiled in right now, the Novo Nordisk lawsuit, the investigations. What are you most concerned about? What's worse, the lawsuit or the FDA potential crackdown on compounded GLP-1s, or the Department of Justice investigation, or the SEC investigation?
So the Novo...
I just want like a ranking so that I can like...
I mean, probably FDA more so because that's a direct... in a worst case scenario, right? That is a core component of, compounding is a core component of what Hims does, right? So, even if GLP got, that's what, maybe 30, no, we don't even know for sure, but
I think 30% is a fair assumption.
Yeah. So 35%, even if, so that's a sizable chunk of revenue.
If that is eviscerated overnight.
If that gets eviscerated, yeah. Yes. But also just opening the door for regulatory scrutiny into all their compounding isn't a nice place to be, right? So Novo will take a few years, might get settled. I mean, I'll tell you, zoomed out, honestly, most of these agencies don't end up having that much teeth. A recommendation to the DOJ also doesn't mean full-on prosecution.
Exactly right. Worth noting. Thanks.
So there was a lot of headlines and, crisis going on right when the pill got launched. But they backed down right away, right? And so who knows what conversations led to that. Yep. There's plenty of things that get referred to the DOJ that never make it anywhere. But the DOJ is not someone to play with either. So, I'm not particularly not worried about any of these. They're all very real risks and weighing on the uncertainty of things. But my rational side thinks a lot of it is going to be far less than worst case scenarios.
With Novo, you think settlement?
I do.
Okay. I want to flag something I tweeted about. The chief medical officer at Eli Lilly just followed Hims' house. Also follows the official Hims comms account. What might be going on here? I'd say there are multiple possible scenarios. Yep. Maybe it's like he's just interested in monitoring people in the space, right? Or maybe they're interested in a potential partnership. Or maybe they're interested in taking action against Hims for something, although Hims never sold tirzepatide, so I don't really know what that would be based on. I'd say those are. I'd say he also follows Zach Raytano, the CEO of Row. So it's not just Hims. He also
Yep.
follows various other people in the space. But he just followed Hims House a week ago.
Yep.
So Hims Lilly, what do you think?
That'd be ideal,
You think that, okay.
So I don't know what I mean. Here's the thing: Hims doesn't host. They part of their whole pitch is that they were going to be like the marketplace for other products, right?
Yes.
And there like is no other products right now. You know what I mean? So like Row is actively partnering. I think it would be beneficial for Hims to partner with a major provider as a customer acquisition tool to cross sell their new customers and existing customers. Will it happen? I don't. The pill launch has gave me skepticism about trustworthy relationships with a lot of these companies as well right now. So I don't know to what to make out of it too much, honestly.
What sort of deal would be interesting to you? Meaning, like, what would you be comfortable with Hims giving up in exchange for the ability to sell brand name Manjaro, Zepbound, maybe in the future Retatrutide, maybe in the future, or Forglipron, the Lilly GLP-1 pill that's launching in Q2?
To me, I don't look at any of those. I don't care if Hims makes any money off of them whatsoever. Right? So to me,
I care that they make a little, but
okay, yeah, a little, but that's what I'm willing to sit with. The position we're in right now, US grew at 17%. Row is accelerating their market share growth. Hims is plateauing. It's still growing. It is flattening, right? Hims does not have the breakthrough drugs on their platform right now, right? I'll tell you as a consumer, right? I would be much more attracted. I don't use GLP-1 or anything, but I know many people who are much more open to taking a pill than they are to self-injections, right? So I'm willing for Hims to use it as a loss leader for customer acquisition and to remain a relevant platform in the United States, right? Hims, based off what they report, has success cross-selling. They have success getting people to use their other personalized solutions.
Yep.
And, not that we do things for KPIs, right? But one way or another, subscribers are slowing down right now. And I think anything that Hims can do to get more subscribers and more people into the platform is a positive. I also want to add, I think it's important to zoom out on Hims, right? As I said earlier, I got in before GLP-1. I didn't come to Hims expecting GLP-1. I got excited when I saw it, and don't get me wrong, GLP-1 can't just, we don't want compounded to just disappear because of the investments they've made, right? But if we really zoom out and you kind of look at things from now compared to pre-GLP-1, like the price we're at, right?
Talking stock price?
Yeah, so stock price, but even valuation, right? Like if we hit the midpoint for the 2026 guide from the second quarter of 2024, that's a 36% revenue CAGR, right? So we are in some tough year-over-year comps right now. We are in some tough quarter-over-quarter growth rate scenarios because we are coming off of a massive spike and basically supercharged period of growth with commercial GLP-1s. So you're talking so 2024 till 2027 at the midpoint would be like a 36% revenue CAGR. If you go all the way back to pre GLP-1, the quarter before, revenue's grown at 57% annualized since then, right? So my point is that it really depends how you look at Hims. If you normalize accepting that like GLP-1 commercial was a very temporary thing and was never here permanently, and you normalize that growth rate, we're still growing pretty rapidly, right? If you take out those comps, next year isn't a 14% year, you know, if you annualize. So I think it's important. That's how I look at HIMSS. But right now, you know, we're trading at the same price that we were before GLP-1.
That's right. We're literally
literally
pre
like
GLP.
I joke around, like I used to feel unique and special saying I bought HIMSS for $14. You know, like now I'm like, well, here we are, dude. Who wants to join the club? But this is not what I envisioned. But you know, there was a billion in trailing 12-month revenue and like 1.7 million subscribers, and the average revenue was somewhere in like the low 60s. Then today, we're in like the, you know, $83 average revenue, 2.5 million subscribers, and 2.4 billion in revenue on a trailing run rate, right? So the company is priced for death right now, you know, and with, you know, it's at like a 1.5 price to sales or something like that.
Trailing.
Trailing.
Forward is going to be 1.
Yeah. So, you know, I had some, you know, I have some past write-ups that people can check out on my Substack and stuff, where I thought I had some grounded expectations of HIMSS price in 2030. But I still think, you know, take this with a grain of salt. I haven't dug in and revalued everything like since earnings, but you know, I think my initial valuations probably deserve like a 40% sentiment haircut. I don't think the business has fundamentally changed that much. We'll need to see over the next couple quarters and where we end. You know, I'm really interested in where we're going to end 2026, right? If we guide up and beat, then I'm very confident in HIMSS' future. But with the you know, and then there's a whole bunch of catalysts like peptides and stuff like that. International growth can really expand, right? But like with a slight, extremely conservative assumptions and like a slight multiple expansion, we can still get to like the 80s, low hundreds in 2030. You know, it's not. I'm really trying to look at the company.
I think there are scenarios that would put the price well beyond that. Actually,
I do too.
But at this point, I don't want to. I'm not making any claims about the stock price.
I'm trying not to get like clipped on X as like some. So I think there's many scenarios that end with the price well beyond that. But my point is, though, today is not an appropriate valuation, in my opinion. Right? I'm not selling.
Even with the litigation risk, the DOJ and FDA investigation, the potential that compounded semaglutide. I think it is a low risk. I think it's a lower risk with every day that passes that compounded GLP-1s are banned. Remember, we still have 1 million plus Americans on these lower than branded priced GLP-1s. There would be a political revolt if not just like a revolt from the compounding pharmacies and companies like HIMSS, and like there would be a political revolt, I believe, if these were banned. And it would probably affect other compounded medications too, which is like probably it seems like bad news for everyone that needs truly personalized medications. So for that reason, most people in the know have suggested that it is a low risk that these are banned. Although I will say it's not a zero anymore. I think like there continues to be some risk of that. Yep.
So that being said, I still think we're priced inappropriately.
Okay.
Right. So I do think sentiment, in my opinion, though, based off recent management moves with the pill, based off the uncertainty that is all built in, any revaluation got pushed out a year.
Yeah.
From what I was expecting easily, you know. And so I think this is a very important year, 2026, right? They're like execution risk is the risk. Like Hims needs to show that they are fundamentally growing and expanding and launching new products, passing through the year over year tough comps and getting back on track. And I think we'll see a rebound.
What multiples do you think are the right ones to use to value a company like Hims? I think we've mostly been talking about price to sales.
Yep.
Which is now, again, forward price to sales of close to 1,
Mm-hmm.
well below historical multiples. But this is a profitable company now, and so I think some
Yep.
people would say that price over sales is a less apt multiple to use versus I don't know, something like enterprise value to EBITDA or even PE. Although for a company that's supposed to be a growth company, probably PE is wrong as well.
Yep.
Where do you come down on that conversation, Mark?
Yeah. So I mean, I still look at price to sales for Hims right now because they, revenue growth statistically is one of the largest indicators of like future profitability of a company. So I do think, and they're investing a lot. They are openly saying we're going to run below break even on many verticals, particularly international. Initially, it's been their go-to strategy. But the other side of that is if we're going to treat them like a pure growth company, then they have to be growing beyond 14%, on the low end. Yeah. So I still look at it, but I also look at like, EV to gross profit and stuff, kind of like as a proxy between price to sales and PE. I think it's too early to look at them PE wise, but even EV to gross profit, they're like trailing 12 months is 2.3 right now. The forward price to sales is crazy. So if what I typically do, I mean, I look at Hims through a whole bunch of different lenses, the cash flow, sales. I try and model out like what the average revenue will be in the future. But even like, Andrew's talked about like 10 million subscribers in 2030 and stuff like that. I don't know about all that at this point, but even at like super conservative, I think 15% growth rates in subscribers, and like a conservative average revenue per user, that's below what they have right now. Framing that they might lose some of their higher costing products, we still land it with like slight multiple expansion. Particularly from this price, you still land at a multi-bagger over the next couple of years, and there's a lot of optionality for those conservative things not to happen.
All right, let's close with a few predictions for 2026. Let's start with revenue. Guidance again is $2.7 to $2.8 billion. That's ex Eucalyptus. What will revenue be? For
2.7-ish. So I think Eucalyptus is going to be included in the second half. So I think we'll be closer to 3. I'd be happy. I think they're a little low right now. I mean, I'm going to say they're reporting like 3.3, 3.4.
3.3 billion. 3.35
including Eucalyptus.
Billion for 26. Okay. Where do you think the stock is trading in 12 months? So March 1st, 2027.
March 1st, 2027. So if Peptides,
you can give me a range too. It's okay.
Yeah,
it's okay.
If Peptides comes out, I mean, I'm gonna just go and say it's still gonna be under sentiment drag. We might have some catalysts. We're at like 15 now. If we hit those numbers, I mean, back in the 40s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will compounded GLP-1s be on the Hims platform at the end of 2026?
Yes.
And Hims won't disclose this, I don't think, but how many peptides users on the Hims platform end of 2026? This is the sort of thing that I have a lot of trouble.
I have zero idea. What do we have? 2.5 million users right now?
Total subscribers, yeah.
End of 2026, peptides come out. I'll give us I don't know. I'll give us a 10% boost. So peptide users, so 10%. That's 200,000. That sounds like a lot, though.
So 200,000 potentially injecting peptides. Fascinating. Maybe.
Yeah, that's a wild guess.
All right, and I'll be honest. I think it's like there's I don't see in between scenarios is all that likely with peptides.
Yeah.
I could see Hims adding 1 million. I think there's
Yeah.
a world in which we had 1 million subscribers for peptides. I think there's a world in which we had 20,000.
Yeah. Yep.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Final question. Other geographies. Brazil's been mentioned. Will we
Yep.
add yet another country by the end of 2026? If so, which?
Yeah, so I think leaning into their international pivot, I do imagine that Brazil will be added. I am excited for like Australia is like a mini US a lot of times for products. So what typically succeeds in the US typically succeeds in Australia and vice versa. So I am excited for Australia and Japan's on there, right?
Yeah, Eucalyptus
yeah.
is
Yeah.
Australia, Japan, and UK as well. Supposedly
Yeah.
the presence is massive there.
So, yeah, I think Japan and Australia in particular might be interesting, and I think Brazil as well would be a big market to tap into.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for coming on Him's House, spending I guess over an hour with us at this point. This has been the Q4 earnings recap. We'll hope to do it again at some point, maybe later this year, maybe 2027. But yeah, thank you so much for being a part of Him's House.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.